Welcome to Perceptions of Engagement with a focus on emerging adults and online undergraduate courses. I am sure that you will find this slideshow to be thoroughly, well, engaging. But wait a minute, how will I know if you're engaged? Does an instructor really know when their students are engaged in online learning? Well, I suppose I could give you a survey or a questionnaire, maybe gather some data and examine it to determine your level of engagement. But wait a minute, is your definition of engagement the same as my definition of engagement? And just how valid are those tools? There are indeed numerous tools that exist to determine levels of student engagement, and these tools are frequently used. However, data has shown that they are not as reliable as we think they are. My own personal experiences with the engagement indicator tool, which you can see to the right, evaluates instructors in online learning environments. This data is gained from student surveys completed at the end of a course. It's then put into a formula, and each line on this table represents one teacher. So for example, in the first row, these are this teacher's scores based on the student survey feedback, which is quantitative in nature. Any teacher with red is identified as being at risk of not engaging their students. As you can imagine, there are several issues with this tool. So when looking at engagement, I think the biggest problem is we don't know what the students think engagement is, and therefore it's necessary to determine when students are engaged, how they're engaged, and what their overall definition of engagement is. And so what I'm asking is, how do students and emerging adults perceive student engagement in online classes? And for a more integrated picture, a picture that takes more into account than surveys and numbers and Likert scales, we want to know, what do students believe to be the most engaging moments of their learning experiences? What strategies do students feel accurately assess their level of engagement? And when are they purposefully engaged in learning activities? And to do this, it's necessary to include qualitative data, which is a missing piece of the bulk of studies that are out there. So I've based my study on adult learning, and that specifically of emerging adults. I'm using grounded theory methodology, so it'll allow me to generate a theory from the data I've collected of these students' lived experiences in the online classroom. Are you with me? Are you still engaged? So who, what, when, where? We know why. I took a random sample of students aged 18 to 24 who've completed an 8-week online 3-credit undergraduate course in an online learning environment. I felt that that would add credibility, reduce bias, it would maintain manageability. These students had a variety of experiences across 3 different disciplines or programs within the schools of arts and science and business. I conducted interviews face-to-face on the university grounds. I used casual meeting places that students regularly utilize, and it was my thought that it would provide an informal, non-academic setting and thus make the students more prone to share their stories. I used a phenomenological inquiry approach so that it had a conversational feel and I could really capture those lived experiences. What I learned was emerging adults enrolled in online undergraduate courses don't talk a lot. They didn't have a lot to share, despite the fact that I had my prompt questions prepared. I had sub questions to lead and to engage, pardon me, them in the conversation. The answers were quick. They were not very detailed, and I really had to probe to get the information that I needed. In addition, I found that they did not feel comfortable. They knew that I was a professor and an academic program manager in the university, and I think that their answers were a little bit guarded. So these were the actual questions that I asked. Tell me about your decisions to enroll. What types of learning activities appeal to you? How did you feel when you were completing these activities? What kept you from engaging? What changes would you make to the learning activities? And then I found some challenges besides the fact that their responses were short, I ran into some technical challenges, and I will tell you that I will always use double recording methods from this point forward. So once I had the data, I did transcribe it by hand. I felt that it would give me a richer viewpoint, a better understanding. And I went through the first read after transcribing and just read. The second read, I highlighted anything that stood out to me, anything at all that spoke to me, that said engagement or disengagement. The next time I read through it, I coded it by category, and you can see to the right that I started seeing themes and patterns, and I used a specific color for each category. On the fourth read, I actually tallied and fragmented that data into subcategories. So for example, when students talked about their emotions, which is the third row down, how they felt, I was able to break that down into a comfort level, which yielded a positive experience for them, a sense of caring, their own feeling of efforts, feelings of being overwhelmed, and a lack of passion for the material had negative experiences. So I took this information then and sat with it for a good long time. And I came up with this. The data suggests that student engagement in an online learning environment is a combination of components that include feelings of confidence, passion, control, the presence of motivation, and an interest in and attainment of knowledge that is of relevance to the student. From that data chart, from the reading and my experiences, these are the 5 pieces of engagement that stood out to me that these students presented through their stories. So therefore, I came to the conclusion, from the perspective of online students, student engagement can be defined as the combined levels of self-confidence, subject matter interest, passion, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and academic achievement one demonstrates as one learns in the online learning environment. It seems so neat and succinct, and it just seems so perfect to me, and I love it. I'm totally committed to this. However, there are some limitations to my work. And the limitations are of the obvious kind, that it's not going to be easy to generalize this data. I had 3 interviews which averaged about 20 minutes, which again were shorter than I had anticipated. I found bracketing and bias to be an interesting piece of my study. When looking at my research proposal, I had talked about bracketing as a method to reduce bias, and I realize now that it's not as simple as just talking about setting your feelings or understandings or belief systems aside, that it requires an understanding of what you believe, what I believe going into a study, and I don't felt that I spent enough time on that. I saw evidence in my interviews of leading or not persuading, but responses that might have veered students in one direction or another. For example, comments of approval, simple things such as yes, those encourage students to continue down that path that they were on. If I had a statement of, oh, really? That swayed the students down a different road. And so I do think, as hard as I tried to bracket and reduce bias, I was not 100% effective in that. And I'm wondering if it ever really is. And my answer to that would be no, because we are a part of our studies. I am a part of this, and there's going to be some type of influence. But understanding that influence and how it affects the data is key to getting trustworthy information and valid findings. So that was my big ta-da moment from this experience. So coming soon to a pilot study near you, I do intend to continue down this path. It has not swayed my opinion that we need to understand what students view engagement in online learning to be in order to understand or to assess whether or not they are engaged. So I do have some unanswered questions. I don't think that I fully addressed the question of how can students be measured? How can their engagement be measured accurately? And I think that that's something in my pilot study I need to look a bit closer, more closely at, because evidence has shown that student surveys and questionnaires and quantitative data just doesn't do it. So my plan is to create the ultimate pilot study that presents a more holistic, encompassing view of student engagement in online learning environments. Thank you.